So this time, let's take a look at the cover art for Transformers comic books issues 11 through 21. Like for the first video, my disclaimer is that I have not looked closely at these for almost 30 years, so please pardon me if I don't know what I'm talking about, which really is a disclaimer that should apply to everything that I say. So here is issue 11, and we see here this is Jetfire with Cliffjumper and what I take to be Hound, the Jeep. And for those of you who are familiar with Jetfire's story, he started out as a Decepticon, and you can see his Decepticon insignia there. And so this issue tells the story of Jetfire and his transition from a Decepticon to an Autobot, but not without doing some damage to the robots that will be his colleagues, or allies maybe is a better word. As is common in the comic books, in contrast to the cartoons, there is actual damage that is inflicted. You will see here that Cliffjumper has some kind of a leg wound with shattering there. I'm not sure how Jetfire would pull out of this dive at this apparent altitude, but he's pretty powerful, so I'm sure he's able to. And there's Hound getting struck on the knee with some horrified people there. But Jetfire, I think, one of the more interesting characters because of his change of allegiance, and also because he's one of the first Autobots who can transform into an airplane, which is really a space plane. He's also pretty big, both as a toy and as an animated or depicted character. So this introduction, coming as it does in one of the first, well, in issue 11, a pretty early issue, I think is significant. And this, I think, is a pretty traditional and good depiction of Jetfire. Well, as I've mentioned in the other video, the comic books tend to have very strange, or at least non-traditional storylines compared to the original cartoon series, and this is a big example of that. You'll see Optimus Prime, Autobot killer, not something you would expect to see ever for any reason. The only thing this is akin to in the TV series was the series that premiered after the 1986 movie, and it was an episode, I think it was a two-part episode, in which Optimus Prime is revived by the Quintessons and is evil, or at least he's sort of like a zombie is a better way to put it, and he attacks Autobots. But this is nothing like that storyline. And truth is, I don't remember what the storyline is in this comic book, and I didn't just read it, but I know it's not like the cartoon series. But there you see a foreboding image of Optimus Prime, still traditionally drawn, but using his powerful cannon there to attack his erstwhile friends. This is Prowl. I take this to be Ironhide. I'm going to say that's Sideswipe, but I'm not 100% sure. But this is not something you would see typically. But the comic book writers really tended to... the traditional presentation of the story as between Autobots and Decepticons, simple and easy like that, is not often followed by the comic book authors. They, I think, reveled in strange and unusual plot twists that are unexpected and in some ways disturbing. Coincidentally, I'm sure Prowl and Ironhide are two of the Autobots who are destroyed on the shuttle in the 1986 movie, and here they are being attacked by Optimus Prime, and you would think 3 Autobots would be a more formidable obstacle, but they aren't. So that's a bit disconcerting. So, Megatron. This is immediately what we see here. This is Megatron in his gun mode, a Walther P-38, a popular pistol among Germans in the Second World War era, with a scope, a silencer, and a stock. And we don't know who is wielding Megatron, but whoever it is shaking. And here we have the Menace of Megatron, and you'll see in the typical 1980s computer font. These days, if you were to see that kind of font, you would think, oh, it's a callback to the 1980s. Well, this is it in its original form. As some of you will know, Megatron as a toy looked exactly like this, and I understand that it would be illegal to sell a toy gun that is not ostentatiously marked as a toy, which is to say, a toy should have like a pink or orange end of the barrel here, or some kind of marking to show that it's a toy. It would not be possible to sell Megatron in its or his original form as he appeared 30 years ago, that's for sure. It really does look like a real gun from far away. This cover is also disturbing because in an era of mass shootings in which we live, of course we can make the distinction between fantasy and fiction and reality, but to see a bunch of people clearly being the victims of some kind of horror is not comforting, but it's a comic book and we keep that in mind. Not a lot of diversity in the crew here, but again, not something surprising from back in those days. Well, we suppose, or at least I suppose, this particular cover gets back into more traditional story arcs of Autobots versus Decepticons and trying to make their way in a world populated with humans. Honestly, who knows what's going on here, but what we have is Grapple, which I can't believe I remembered his name, but that is Grapple, who is grappling with one arm because his other arm is this weird cannon, and that is, Starscream, Thundercracker, Skywarp, it's hard to say, firing a rocket into a crowd with a very colorful 1980s rock band. This man looks a lot like Bruce Springsteen, and maybe I have no idea what Bruce Springsteen looks like, but that's what he appears to be to me, with the bandana, you see. I've never seen a guitar that color, and clearly the members of this band work out a great deal. I enjoy the color choices by the artists. Another disclaimer, by the way, in case it should be perceive that I'm in any way making fun of the cover art. I cannot draw. I cannot color, and so I admire anyone with artistic talent. I don't have it. Having said that, though, I'm not sure I would have gone with a pink and green choice, although it does match his sunglasses. So, if you've seen the first video, you'll recall one issue with a character called Circuit Breaker, who is a woman who underwent some modifications in which she's able to emit electricity and is somehow dressed up in a bikini made of silicon circuit boards. Well, this is very similar to that. You'll see Robot Master. So this is yet another story about some supervillain human who has been able to take control of or compete with Autobots and Decepticons. Love the goggles and the gloves, and we see here presumably Laserbeak and Soundwave, and that's Grapple again, that's Bumblebee, and that's Trax, a rather later edition, Trax being a Corvette Stingray, but who could also fly. And in the cartoon version, he sort of sounded like Mr. Howell from Gilligan's Island, as I recall. And then I don't know who that is at all, or whether he almost looks generic to me. And there, of course, is Megatron. I think a pretty good depiction of him there. His arm's a little weird, but my standard objection to plots like this is, can this guy who looks like Greatest American Hero really somehow acquire the power to in any way compete with or undermine the power of Transformers? I think not, but I was not consulted on the story for these issues, and if I was, it would have gone out of business immediately. Well, here is another pretty disturbing portrayal of one of the most loved characters in the Transformers story, and that's Bumblebee. And you'll see here he is getting riddled with weapons fire by Decepticons, and I think one of the most striking things is the grimace on his face. More specifically is the fact that his eyes are black, and those of us who are Transformers fans know that if the eyes go dark, that means the robot is dead. And so Bumblebee does not die in this, although it's called Bumblebee's Last Stand. But rest assured, Bumblebee does not expire after the 16th issue. But it looks that way because he is getting heavily damaged by the, again, Skywarp or Thundercracker, Laserbeak, and I can't remember. That's Laserbeak because of the red sort of intake vents, and then Laserbeak had a kind of a twin whose name I do not recall, which bothers me, but I just can't remember it. And then there is Shockwave, who is in his gun mode, who can indeed fly according to his technical specifications, and it is also accurate that he is not shrunken, specifically because Shockwave has never been converted to an Earth form. Then he doesn't need to conceal himself from Earthlings. So the point is, he transforms into a gigantic flying pistol. but he's not firing. If he did, I suppose Bumblebee would be in worse shape. Again, the pink and green combination so favored by the color artists. But this, I think, is consistent with the comic book author's persistent attempt to shock and to perhaps horrify a little bit comic book readers, because very often the Autobots come off badly. That is, they seem to be victimized quite a bit by Decepticons, even though they should be able to put up a better fight. But I guess that's what helps wrap you into the story. Well, so here in issue 17, we have Meanwhile back on Cybertron, which kind of harkens back to the old Justice League cartoon with that deep-voiced voiceover saying, "Meanwhile, back with the Justice." I don't know what he says. It doesn't matter. But look, this is definitely Blaster. You'll see the cassette compartment. These other ones, I think, are completely generic. But what this is reminiscent of is the 1986 movie, the scene in which the Autobots who have been ingested by Unicron are being hoisted into a vat of molten liquid. This is not what this is about. It's different, but the imagery is very, very, very similar. I mean, that's pretty grotesque and horrifying. You know, the Autobots, or the Decepticons for that matter, were never presented as particularly emotionless, except for some, maybe like Soundwave or Shockwave, but they do definitely have feelings, and so when you see creatures in pain, even though they're Autobots, it's pretty jarring, and this is not a comfortable view. And to see Blaster, who has a charming and sociable, fun-loving personality, being dropped into the vat of bubbling liquid, you know, it doesn't make you too happy. And again, this is coming after an issue in which we just see Bumblebee being heavily damaged by the Decepticons. So one week after another, it is what horrors can be inflicted on the Autobots. In issue 18, we see Blaster in much better shape. He is battling this entity called Straxus. I can't tell you who Straxus is, not because of the willingness to, or the unwillingness to disclose spoilers, but because I just don't remember who Straxus is. I can tell you that he has a very funny shaped head and wields an axe, but beyond that, I have no idea who this is. And clearly Blaster's aim could be improved, and that's not a very comfortable position, but we're clearly back on Cybertron. You'll see this bridge, and there's the Decepticon emblem, and they appear to be falling, but it is nice that they've taken the story back to Cybertron, because it helps to give insights into the backstory, into the home world. So it's a good deviation from the normal storyline. And it's also clear when the authors, the comic book producers, have favorite characters, because they focus on them quite a bit, and Blaster is one of those. And you have to admit that Blaster was a great character. Luckily, he survived the war on Earth in the 1986 film. So, in issue 19, we have the introduction, apparently by popular demand. You asked for him, you got him, Omega Supreme. And indeed, Omega Supreme is a great character. As you'll recall, he is he's a rocket station, right? So his arms are a rocket, and then his appendages back here are tracks, and he's a little tank head. But the thing about Omega Supreme is that he's enormous, he's powerful. He is not particularly intelligent, but we don't hold that against him. We see here Rumble and perhaps Frenzy, and maybe that's Thundercracker and Skywarp. That's certainly Starscream. And they can't handle Omega Supreme. And really, if anything, I would think Omega Supreme would be larger in scale than he is in this depiction. But it's always, well, it's always nice, I guess you could say, to have the introduction of a very strong and powerful character who, especially as an Autobot, because as I've mentioned, in these comic books so often the Autobots apparently are helpless in the face of Decepticon power. That is evidently not the case when it comes to Omega Supreme. So we're happy to see Omega Supreme. Let's see, this is from August 1986. Well, the film was released in July 1986, so this is just a month after that. And there's Omega as a tank and his rocket form and the track. Behold Omega Supreme. Well, that is a great way to introduce that character. So, sometimes, too, the storylines in the comic books can be a bit corny. That is not a big deal. It's a comic book. But this is one of the cornier storylines. This is Megatron, and I have no idea at all who that is. I don't recognize him one bit. But this is Megatron and this Autobot in a Old Western standoff, a draw. And indeed, he is adopting the Western dialect. This town ain't big enough for the both of us, Autobot. Draw. Well, it's difficult to draw when you're wearing your armaments. And why these humans would be around the Transformers at this proximity seems strange, but hey, how often do you see enormous robots? And you see like an old western ghost town here with a hotel, and these of course are tumbleweeds and extremely verdant grass, which grass is not typically associated with Old West ghost towns, and that is why you typically see tumbleweeds blowing across. You don't see tumbleweeds in grasslands. But again, it's fiction. This did not bother me when I was 12 years old, and it probably shouldn't now. It really doesn't. But Megatron, he looks very grim-faced there. That's a draw-dropper. But for some, I actually like this particular cover because it's pretty silly and ridiculous. We have Megatron as Clint Eastwood or some other, John Wayne, for example. Why on earth would he be saying that? Why wouldn't he just attack? But that's the kind of absurdities that one can expect in science fiction, but that also make it enjoyable. Well, ending on a strong note here, at least for the comic books, is issue 21, the introduction of the aerial bots. And I will admit that the aerial bots were or are among my favorites because, well, because they're airplanes, and who doesn't like airplanes? And not only are they airplanes, but they're also a combiner force. And not only that, but because they were created later, they struggle to understand the war between the Autobots and Decepticons, and not so much what side they should be on, but how they should conduct themselves. And so the reader, or the viewer, in the case of the TV program, can live vicariously through the aerial bots as they navigate their way through this conflict. And this is a great depiction. You have here, this is thrust, and that's dirge, and that's ramjet. But I will immediately say here that I just do not remember all of this aerial bot's names. This is Silverbolt, and that's Slingshot. But I cannot remember the names of the other ones, which is unfortunate, but I just can't. I don't remember. Now, you will note some interesting things, I suppose, is that Silverbolt is the leader, a Concorde, apparently unarmed, as is this one, the F-16. This is a Harrier jet, short takeoff and landing jet, a British airplane. That's what Slingshot was. And this is an F-15, similar to, well, not similar, it's the same plane as Skywarp, Thundercracker, and Starscream. However, in the toy form, this one is much, much smaller than those three I just mentioned. In fact, all of these, well, these four are considerably smaller in scale than the full-size Decepticon planes, which is a pain when you're trying to play with them, or at least if you have a inflexible imagination, which perhaps I do. And it is also too bad, I suppose, that this is not some kind of a dogfight. I'm sure it's more easily depicted this way, and it's not that big of a deal, but it would be nice if this was some kind of a dogfight. They are airplanes. Most notably, of course, with the aerial bots, is that they combine to form Superion, an extremely powerful gestalt robot, more than the sum of its parts. And Superion and the aerial bots were created to counter the Stunticons, that is, the vehicle Decepticons, the Decepticons that could transform into vehicles and merge into Menasor. That is not the way the arc develops in the comic books, but that's my preferred version from the cartoon. We'll just take a quick look to see if we can find Superion in here, but I will just look and see. This is what this is. It's not Shrapnel. This is Bombshell. Yes, that is Bombshell, the Insecticon. But I suppose if we go to the back, there's someone with Megatron. Let's see if we can see here. Oh yes, here we go. So there's Superion. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, okay. Well no, the Ramjet, we already mentioned that. Okay, so I guess Superion merges here. Yes, there we are. Aerial bots combine. And there he is, Superion. I think oh, there's Megatron calling for his daddy. Oh wait, that's not Megatron calling for his daddy. That's a little girl. But there we have Superion. Pull my trigger, fleshling. Pull my trigger. Well, I think that will be a quote that we all can live by. Fleshling again. I really like that. But what's Megatron supposed to call him? I mean, he doesn't know the names of these people. But you would think, here's the thing, right? Why on earth can't Megatron activate himself? Meaning, isn't it a bit of a design flaw? And bear with me on this. But here's Megatron 3 times saying, pull the trigger, fleshling. Right? Here he is. That's twice. Pull the trigger, fleshling. Pull the trigger. Pull the trigger. Well, that's him saying it, not Megatron. But Megatron has had blast the jet. So, blast it. So, what? 4 or 5 times we have Megatron frustratingly imploring this dopey guy to shoot Megatron. How frustrating must that be that when he's in robot mode, Megatron can shoot his cannon at will, but when he's in gun mode, it requires someone to pull his trigger. Isn't that a bit of a design flaw? I've never thought about that before, but again, one has a lot more wisdom later on in some cases. You would think it would be easier for Megatron just to transform into robot mode and attack the Aerobots himself, but that would not have been as exciting. Oh, well, look at this. I guess we'll end with this, but I mentioned Circuit Breaker early in this video, and lo and behold, here she is as a preview to the next issue. Oh, here, the Stunticons arrive, the Aerobots return, Circuit Breaker strikes. Well, my golly. And here we have the, not just scantily clad, but for all intents and purposes, nude Circuit Breaker. Again, who is apparently content to be dressed in circuit boards. Luckily, they go around her feet. And to make the point I've perhaps made too many times, why is it that the Autobots always end up as the victims? Why are they the ones that are relatively powerless in the face of these superhumans, especially? So that you have here, this is Powerglide, and that, I want to say, is Blaster. I hope that seems like too simple of a name, but that's the tank that interjects the word boom every 3rd word. Is it Blaster? This is the UFO, but I do not remember his name at all. That kind of looks like Trax, but I don't know, and that could be Blaster, but Blaster's kind of antennae are different, and I think these are generic. That's, I guess, a thinner version of this, when these both are maybe less developed versions of the Incredible Hulk, perhaps, I don't know, but again, why is Circuit Breaker just going after the Autobots? Why are there no Decepticon heads here? Because I don't think that these are Decepticon heads. And why is she able, of all Autobots, to capture a UFO, a plane, and a tank? And not just any plane, by the way. You may recall that Powerglide was a A-10 Warthog airplane, which was equipped with an extremely powerful rotating cannon, is heavily armed, and whose tactical job was to, or is to, destroy tanks. So in other words, these are some of the 3 most formidable Autobots in terms of their capabilities, and yet apparently they're subject to being overloaded electrically by circuit breaker. But again, that's what keeps it interesting, I suppose. And so that wraps up 11 through 20. If only we could have Jolly Rancher Watermelon Sticks, S-T-I-X, new for 1986. That would be a fine, fine way to end this video, but alas, we don't. Well, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed that, and see you next time.